There is a difference between being lonely and being alone. The latter is just a state of being in which nobody else is around. The former is a soul-sucking emotion, which describes a deep form of sadness and destitution attributed to a lack of connection with others. You can be lonely and not alone, and you can be alone while not being lonely. Connection isn't quite love, and it isn't quite community, but it's this feeling that there are people on your team, fighting for the same side with the same goals in mind. This video is not about connection. This video is about the absence of connection. It's about being alone with your thoughts. It's about solitary nights spent at the edge of the earth. Chiefly, it's about the long dark. Hello everybody, my name is Serrated Cucumber, and today we're going to talk about The Long Dark, a survival narrative game developed and published by Hinterland Studios, released for PC, Xbox One and PS4 in August of 2017 after a few years in early access. The Long Dark is one in a long line of many survival games. Like many others before it, it was a crowdfunded project, with Hinterland receiving seed money from the Canada Media Fund, securing further capital later through a Kickstarter campaign in 2013. The player assumes the role of a solitary survivor of the frozen wilderness, following an apocalyptic event that caused the entire region to fall into disrepair and sparse abandonment, and you're the only one around. We lay our scene in the northern Canadian wilderness shortly following the first flare, the game's apocalypse event. Dropped into a vast, unfamiliar environment with nothing but the clothes on your back and nobody alive or around to help you. Desolate wilderness lays for miles ahead, and the player is left to fend for themselves. A sight not too unfamiliar to those seasoned with survival games, but something about The Long Dark is different, and you will feel it. The game's unique art style may be the first thing that sets it apart from other games of its genre. While many survival games opt for a realistic approach, The Long Dark embraces low-polygon, blocky assets and a paintbrushed aesthetic, not too dissimilar to games such as Life is Strange. The game adorns the white canvas of a snowy wasteland with a spectrum of tonal colour, often cascaded by its skybox, from the soft embers of a distant, warming sunset to the striking purples and greens of a raging Aurora Borealis in the dead of night. The game's art style is strong and memorable and boosts its frigid atmosphere to new heights, an atmosphere you'll soon grow all too familiar with as you load up the game in survival mode for the first time. Your first playthrough will be unceremonious. From the moment you're given control of your vessel, your life is on a rapidly expiring timer, an hourglass that will drain faster and faster as you struggle to find the basics to stay alive. This takes the form of 4 status bars. The bitter cold of the waste is a constant threat and is nearly always poised to claim your life at a moment's notice. Once you're swept up in the encompassing fog of a snowstorm, there is a chance that only a lifeless body will be left in its wake. Fatigue controls everything the player can do, from carrying life-saving materials to running from ravenous wolves. Fatigue is one of the most common killers. Not that the player will die from exhaustion, but that they simply won't have enough energy to run to shelter fast enough while a storm brews, or to carry enough food for the journey home. Speaking of food, a bare bones essential. Without food, you won't last a day in the wild. Decent food is a scarce resource in the frigid apocalypse, often pilfered from the withered remains of abandoned houses, at least until the supply is exhausted. And I'll trust that you don't need me to explain why drinking water is important. You begin your first journey through the boundless, snowy wilderness. Perhaps you're lucky and find scraps of food in an abandoned car, scavenging meagre supplies such as medication, food, water, clothes and tools from the game's scattered bastions of forgotten civilization, or from the corpses that preceded you in the very fields you stand in. But this is merely a futile effort to stave off the inevitable. Whether it's through hypothermia, starvation or dehydration, whether you make it 20 seconds or 20 minutes, eventually, you too will come to the end of your collision course with death and fade into the long dark. You start again. Despite the scenery remaining unchanged, you're hundreds of kilometers away from your previous life in an entirely new region of Great Bear Island as a whole new survivor. You trudge, once again, through the endless snow, knowing just slightly more than your previous brief existence. Combined with a bit of luck, it may be enough to get you just that bit further, but you will still die. You start again, and again, lasting just a little longer each time. and perhaps soon, you live to see your first night underneath the all-encompassing deep freeze that sweeps over the barren landscape as the sun turns its back on you. You realise just how hostile an environment you're in, and before you can even begin to adjust to it, you die again. Time will go on. You'll try again as just another nameless survivor. Sometimes you won't last 5 minutes. Others you'll go days, weeks even, before you succumb to your destiny. Maybe you go out on your usual trip to the forest, get caught out by a flash snowstorm, lose your way in the snow, and fade out, face down, in a desolate clearing, just minutes away from your base camp. Perhaps you last long enough to hunt down your first rabbit, only to have its scent tracked by a wolf that's just as hungry and desperate as you are. But eventually, you'll grow systems for survival. You'll learn how to disinfect and bandage your wounds. You'll master the art of gaining weight to carry more equipment. You'll start to plan ahead for the game's unpredictable weather. And soon, the world will seem a less scary place. Journeys outside of your secluded, safe spot begin to feel possible. So you venture out, gear on your back, in search of more. A city, maybe. A small bastion of civilization. Vendors. A safe spot to bunker down, maybe. So you walk. Slowly, I might add. The game's map is very large. It will take you hours of real time to journey from area to area, not even just on account of the travel time, but the pit stops, waiting out storms, cooking food, resting in caves, finding roads and power lines to follow. You seek out these pockets of forlorn civilization scattered across the vast wastelands of northern Canada, rare as they may be, just hoping that once you get there you might find something, anything that'll help you. A bedroll, a tin of soup, even some socks can mean the difference between life and death. Over time, you begin to find yourself immersed in the game's atmosphere. Without even realising it, you've adopted a survivalist's mindset. You begin to make contingency plans when the wind picks up, or when you hear the all-too-familiar howling of a distant pack of wolves. Before you even know it, the game has you hooked. It's just you, a lone survivor, doing their best to make it to their next meal. You're not building extravagant bases, finding stashes of weapons, gunning down hordes of enemies. You will never find the longevity and security you're looking for because the Long Dark has no destination other than your eventual death. When you find a lone shack basking in the morning sun and rummage through its abandoned contents, food that's just stale, not rotten, you get the sense that you arrived just slightly too late to the party, and you're alone again, back at square one. This is where the game differs from other survival titles. The Long Dark does not stake its claim to such a riveting atmosphere through its substance, but through its absence. Hinterland showcased their strongest moments not in the glory of a shootout or building an efficient survivalist based out of fallen trees, but in the warmth of a campfire within a solitary cave, sharpening your knife if you were lucky enough to find one, in cooking meagre, stale food rations over a dwindling flame that's definitely not going to last you all night. Listening so intently through the howling wind and the wall of darkness at the mouth of your cavern, praying you'll hear the creatures that may lurk in the deep dusk before they hear you. Moments like this encapsulate the Long Dark. You're not a survivalist, nor an ex-military protagonist trawling through loot-heavy cities, defeating hordes of bad guys. You're another corpse in the snow, just biding its time, chasing a forlorn dream of living a normal life. There's no prophetic safe haven at the end of all of this. You live a deafeningly quiet existence until you no longer do. And if you want to make the time between those two events as long as possible, you'll need to fight like hell to survive. Let's say you do manage to make your way through those painful first few days and weeks, narrowly avoiding death, scavenging corpses in the waste, in the hopes of avoiding becoming one of them. Your problems aren't solved, you just get new ones. The game's loot tables are balanced in such a way that scavenging tinned food from small ranches and towns won't sustain you forever. Even if you are fortunate enough to stumble upon the mining town of Milton or the iron confines of Blackrock Penitentiary, you're eventually going to run the food supply into the ground over weeks of calorie-burning activities. This leaves you with two options: become self-sufficient, learning to snare rabbits and hunt larger game, or look further afield for food. Focusing on the first option, this comes with a whole set of issues. Wolves, for example, are a brilliant source of sustainable food, only that their meat is often infected with parasites, causing significant bouts of devastating illness to decimate your playthrough. Not to mention the expenditure of resources such as ammunition, clothing, and flares used up when fighting larger animals. Do you, say, carry more supplies with you to guarantee a safety net against these creatures, or travel light in the hopes you'll be able to outrun a pack of the game's ravenous timber wolves? You'll quickly realise that trying the traditional survival game methods of just creating one base of operations isn't going to work. Travelling and exploration are key themes of this game. You'll spend hours roaming the desolate wastes just to stumble upon a lone cabin with a single corpse in it, clutching a rifle. A welcome gift, but a reminder that even the most prepared survivors are no match for the ruthless, uncaring wastes. Great Bear plays no favourites. There's no judge or jury out here to determine whether your death was fair. You're at the mercy of this strange land of which you were a clueless trespasser, stumbling about in an effort to keep going, to not end up as another body in this frosty mass graveyard. It never gets easier. There's no magic bullet item that'll save your life, no portable heater, no military compound with infinite ammunition. You'll spend your 100th night skinning rabbits with the same knife you found on day 2. There's no such thing as thriving, only surviving. But the game has a great sense of progression through its slow building skill system, allowing you to sew clothes more efficiently, create sustainable weapons such as bows and arrows, and start fires quicker, reducing your chances of you being caught out in the wind without warmth. The game is intuitive enough once you survive long enough to get to the grips with the core mechanics, but you're your own guide, even down to writing your own maps as you explore the regions, tagging points of interest with graffiti, and using charcoal to survey the landscape during clear conditions. The Long Dark harkens back to an era of gaming before railroaded tutorials and player gratification, a time when developers weren't scared of players being frustrated at their game. It doesn't shy away from its learning curve, but instead fully embraces your fish out of water situation. You are a stranded, nameless victim of Mother Nature, with no past and certainly no future. So you do what you can to live in the present. You will die a lot, you will feel cheated out of a chance, and it will not feel fair. But in those moments you live, you learn to appreciate the quiet. You become satisfied with your small accomplishments, and learning more suddenly feels so rewarding. You eventually cozy down with a hot coffee while your clothes dry on the floor of a living room that ironically hasn't been used for living in a long time. The fire's roaring, and just for this brief moment, there's a lapse in the onslaught of challenges. Time stands still, and the sound of wind raging outside isn't a worry for once. Just a calming reminder of the fate you narrowly avoided today. The game uses this still silence to drive player engagement. There's no clear endgame to the Long Dark, and the player is never left thinking they're 100% safe. Whether it's their water supply is running low, a blizzard that's been raging for days, or knowing that there's only a few more houses left in town to exhaust before they bleed the entire area dry of food, there's always contingency planning to be done. The Long Dark does a good job of never quite allowing the player to feel safe and comfortable. Every day is an active battle to get to the next, and this gameplay loop is incredibly satisfying once it's mastered. There are no automated systems to work towards, no endgame loot, everything is painstakingly done by hand. This leads to an experience that you can truly get immersed in, allowing yourself to spend hours beneath the burning cold skies, trekking through miles of thick snow to reach the next town, knowing there may just be a safe, warm shack waiting at the end of the trail. At least, until the next time you need to move on. However, there is one thing that interrupts the game's still solitude. One event to undercut this creeping sense of loneliness. The Aurora. The Aurora is one of many weather systems in the Long Dark, a temporary acceleration in pace from the usual ongoing solitude of Great Bear. The Aurora seems to be the catalyst for the world's destruction, sending once dormant electrical systems going haywire, alighting the world with a white-hot sheer light. The buzzing of electrical wires and the flickering of lights manage to make the world feel temporarily alive, but in a strange, altogether corrupted way, as if puppeteered by some supernatural power. Hinterland subverts the player's expectations of believing that civilization and power would be their saviour by showing them something they feel they were never meant to see. it's almost akin to a horror game, not through cheaply filling jump scares, but through sheer atmosphere alone. The Aurora flares are so intense and evocative, often waking up the player in the middle of an otherwise peaceful slumber to the sound of crackling wires and light bulbs, a disturbing shift of pace in the game's otherwise cozy, quiet vibe. But the Aurora is not merely a cosmetic event or something that influences temperature like the game's other weather systems. The Aurora has some kind of darker, corrupting force behind it, one that threatens to disrupt the natural order of the Long Dark's remote landscapes. Exposed electrical wires and bodies of water threaten to fry the player at any moment, sending white-hot sparks coursing through their body, afflicting them with devastating electrical burns. These wires often hang from loose machinery such as power lines and are common enough to become a threat for unaware players trying to figure out these geomagnetic storms. There are benefits to the Aurora, however. For one, battery-powered items like flashlights will suddenly be revived, hypercharged full of power. Radios and computer systems will work again, allowing the player but a short glimpse into what the world may have been like before the collapse of the destroyed Great Bear. At least, a heavily corrupted version of it. And of course, there's the wildlife. I've touched on the Long Dark's wildlife a couple of times throughout this video, but there are few greater examples of the role wildlife plays in dashing the player's hopes than their corruption under the spell of the Aurora. The once regular eyes of wolves and bears alike grow with an evil green flare. By the time you notice these eyes blinking at you from the dark woods, it's far too late to run or hide. You'd best hope you packed a gun or thick enough clothes to withstand the onslaught of these creatures. Aurora-stricken wolves behave far differently to their regular counterparts. For the first time in the game's dull moments fading out in the snowy underbrushes of Great Bear, your life is in danger not from Mother Nature, but from something far more sinister and supernatural. You are actively being hunted, and for once, amidst the buzzing of frayed wires, the howling of aggressive, corrupted wolves out for blood, and the frenzied gunshots, you're not alone. It's not quiet. It's overstimulating and terrifying. What was once a simple quiet walk in the dark has become an illuminated nightmare full of terror. If you're caught out like that, it may simply be that nothing is enough to save you. All of your time spent gathering food, water, even weapons, it may not have been sufficient to defend yourself against the onslaught of the Aurora's devastating beauty, which threatens to revoke your right to live each time you dare take advantage of it or underestimate its power. You die, you respawn, and you hope to God the skies remain quiet next time. The Long Dark is not for everyone. The game is tedious, uncaring, and at times downright unfair. You will not have your hand held. You won't even live long enough to discover all of the ways you can die until well over 100 hours into the game. The apocalypse that sweeps over the wilderness is one of sheer silence. Hinterland doesn't need to throw hordes of enemies at you, because just the fear of what lurks in the unknown is enough. Temporary safety is something the player will covet and chase for their entire duration of their tenure in the Canadian wilderness. You are not part of Mother Nature's plan. You are a trespasser in this frigid graveyard, paved with the corpses of those who failed before you, a grim reminder of the fate that likely awaits you. Every home you scavenge through is a testament to a person that once lived there, who read the books you now use to fuel your campfire, but you were not fortunate enough to be them. You are a lonely wanderer, using the remnants of the lives of others to live one more miserable day. The Long Dark inspires fear in those who play it above all else. There's a certain hopelessness to knowing that even if you live to see the next week, there's nothing to ease your suffering on the horizon. No reason to keep going other than a pure instinct to see the sun come up the next day. To finally breach a valley and stumble upon a fresh bunch of loot at the next ghost town, and knowing deep down a gun won't save them from a snowstorm, and a ski jacket won't save them from a ravenous pack of wolves corrupted by the Aurora. The gameplay loop, combined with the insanely expansive map, is enough to keep the player enthralled on their journey for hours at a time, and over time, the player learns to embrace the probability of their imminent death, and become at home with their silence. You should play The Long Dark. It's a lonely experience like no other. Draw your curtains, grab a cup of hot chocolate, and allow yourself to delve deeper and deeper into the frosty layers of rural Canada over the evening. Be patient with the game and with yourself. Start on a lower difficulty maybe, and go on an adventure through the lonesome wilds. Even if your footprints are eventually lost in the snow, is that any reason not to venture out? Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm aware that this is very different to my main style of content, but I've wanted to try branching out from Life is Strange for a good while, and so this feels appropriate. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and leave a comment if you played Long Dark before, or even if you're thinking of giving it a go. I'll also have my Discord and Patreon linked in case you feel like chatting or showing your appreciation in the form of a tip. I also want to say a massive thank you for the performance on my last video. It did insanely well, to an unprecedented degree, and it would not have been possible without you all. I've been having such a good time reading all of your comments, and it's really inspired me to create more. With that, I think I've said my piece. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember to keep yourselves warm and keep your cucumbers serrated. Bye!